Good morning, everybody. Welcome to another episode of Coffee with Friends. Today we will be discussing, Amish preaching. It's going to be interesting. Before we get started, I'd like to remind our viewers and listeners that this live stream may discuss trauma of all sorts, to include all types of abuse. Viewers and listeners may find it unsettling and triggering. If this live stream causes you distress, please seek support from your trusted folks and qualified mental health professionals as needed. You may also cease listening until you are able to listen again. And as a reminder, the guests on our live streams reflect a diverse set of values, morals, and ethics that may not reflect the morals, values, and ethics of the Misfit Amish. With that being said, I'd like to welcome Lynda. Hi, Lynda. Good morning.
Good morning. Good morning. Are you excited?
You're excited?
Yeah, I said, are you excited?
I'm excited because I think it's interesting to think about Amish preaching and the way that it could be like, sometimes when we had preachers, like there was always certain preachers, like remember how you just like, you fell asleep to them. Did you ever have that?
Right, where you fell asleep to certain preachers because they sort of have a sing-song voice but didn't have much emotion to what they were saying. It was like they were reciting a poem or something.
So kind of like this. It's like, good morning, everybody. We are all gathered here today because of the beautifulness of this day, and we're coming together in like the name of. I can't even do it. I can't do it. I just can't.
Well, you can't really do it. There's no copying it in English. It doesn't even sound similar. Like you have to do it in German to really understand. Do it in German. Do it in German. See if we can hear it. But you can't do it in German the way you do yours. You have to do it like the preachers that we don't like.
Liebe Brüder und Schwestern, heute sind wir mal da versammelt, es war noch immer da, dass wir einen Tag geben, was wir Bilder haben. Erst, ich habe aber auch ins Bett gestrahlt, ich habe mir so schnell aufgeben können für den Hasewille. Es war so ein Drubbel für aufstehen, fand ich die ganze Gemäh. Ich habe schnell gewusst, was ich sagen kann, und ich habe schnell gewusst, was ich euch geben kann. Aber endlich habe ich euch mich mal ein bisschen aufgegeben, nun habe ich noch ein bisschen ein paar Stunden schlafen. Ich weiß so schnell, was wir tun, ich weiß nicht, wo vorangehen, ich weiß nicht, wo wir gucken, für mich aufgeben, für den Hasewille. What?
Oh my goodness.
What?
I would never be able to do that. Never. I would have like stuttered at the second word, I think.
You would have stuttered? Oh, ich habe aber noch so viel etwas zu sagen, ich weiß nicht even wie so. Und ich weiß nicht, wie viel jedes Mal rauskommen nicht mehr, und sie müssen etwas für ihn nehmen mit sich.
I mean, you weren't wrong that you said you wanted to be an Amish preacher.
I had practice. I've had lots of practice.
How? How did you have practice? I have to have a sip of my coffee.
Okay, well, how did I have practice? Well, I practiced, but see, like those were the preachers, like they would just put you to sleep. You'd just be sitting in church, eating, and I was on YouTube abhärtig, så das immer, hen sie etwas in den Weg, finde ich mir. Ja, ich habe tennis as soon as rauskommen, waren so ein schöner Tag als der Hounds gegeben hat. Und so hat mir hier gemacht, bis die Dinge, wie für ein Privilege es ist, für durchstehen.
Well, before we begin the preaching, we've totally
Say what? You're cutting out right now.
I said
oh, say it again.
Before we begin the preaching, we need to sing the song first. You forgot.
Well, for was soll ich schwätzen, wenn ich Singer. Why should I talk about singing? Come on.
Well, because we always sang first before we preach. That's why.
Yes, we did always sing first before we preach. Shall we begin? Or shall we talk about how the ministry filed in for first? Everybody showed up by a certain time, right? And if you didn't show up by a certain time, even though church didn't start until the top of the hour or whatever, it was like everybody, you were a spectacle.
Well, it probably would be a good idea to explain the first part, because after all, we're talking about Amish preaching. And I think the reason we decided to talk about Amish preaching was because of people's question. There's like it seems to be people have different opinions about the Amish and how it's not a hierarchy, or how the hierarchy works, or something like that. Is that correct? Like, am I saying it correctly? Like, that's what brought us here to this point?
Yes. People do have differing opinions about hierarchy, and the point is that if you are not familiar with the group's structural authority, how can you even begin to recognize it, even when you see it, especially when it's a decentralized authority, which is not exactly how, when you look at secular society. Like, for example, let's talk about the military and the government for a second. If you look at our country, for example, you have the president, then you have the vice president, and so on and so forth. And there's a whole tier, like there's layers of structured hierarchy, overt authority. When you have decentralized leadership, it works differently. And trying to explain that to people who were not raised in it can feel really difficult and overwhelming at times. Because decentralized leadership doesn't mean that the same structure of authority doesn't exist. What it means is it exists on many different levels. Like, for example, you have the settlement structure, because every settlement has different rules. But then you have like the church districts within the settlement, and then even like added to that, like the father figure or the family, like they can add additional things to the Ordnungsbrief. Which also, by the way, you can't take away from UCMJ, but you can add to it. So anyway, so that's how we got here, because we were talking about the way that Amish preachers like walk in. So you have like usually every single Amish church I've ever went to, it has been this structure of like the bishop is the one who starts, from the barn usually, or from outside on a Sunday morning, starts going around, starts shaking hands with everybody. And then the ministry would actually give the holy kiss to some people, but not others, like to each other. But they wouldn't necessarily give it to every church member. Like, that was never a thing. Like, we just gave the ministry a handshake. Like, we would be the girls sitting in standing in the wash house, not sitting in it, standing in the wash house or the basement, and we would all be lined up, and the ministry would come around, and first the bishop would come in, and they would usually go in the right order, like counterclockwise around the room, and they would shake hands with everybody to greet them. And then after that, the ministry would move to the kitchen, where the women folks and small children and other older girls, but not old enough to go with the girls yet, would be seated, and they would go around and shake their hands too. And then the ministry would go in the living room and sit down, but it was the bishop, the ministers, and the deacon. Now, to my best understanding, some church districts will have 3 ministers, but that is a rare occurrence, and usually resolves itself when a church district splits.
So I have before you go into that part, I have a question about the districts that didn't have the bishop, because not every district had a bishop. So who was supposed to go first then, if there was no bishop? If There was 3 ministers and a deacon. How did they know who was supposed to go first?
Well, that depended on how they had it structured, but often the deacon was supposed to like fill in for the bishop, or you would have the most senior minister go first, which was an age thing usually.
Well, wasn't it ordained? Like, I know in our districts, maybe not in the ones that you were at, in the districts I remember, it was the one who was the oldest, longest ordained. It didn't necessarily go by age.
Yeah. Thank you for clarifying that. That's
because it could be a 22-year-old, and if he was ordained before a 50-year-old, he would still go first because he was the longest ordained.
Yep. So their seniority and the position gave them more authority.
Yep.
Is what Lynda is trying to say. Yes. But also like some churches, typically more like New Order churches, which we would have called like NRA Amish, right? Yeah. Would you have looked at them as like really since he really Dutch?
Isn't that really Dutch? Isn't that really Amish? So that's what NRA means, is not really Amish. When we say, well, they're NRA Amish, that's kind of what we mean. There's plenty of them around, you know. They like to speak for the majority of the Amish too.
But they're a different flavor of Amish, and it makes it interesting to hear that, like, you know, like we didn't have that. So one of our listeners says, I feel like we're all together for a play date and are setting the rules so everyone is on the same page before we play church. Well, thank you for coming to church today. Yeah, you know, I'm going to tell you about like the other type of preacher. So first, like we would do all of that, and then all the men and boys, the men would file in, and then after the men were all seated, the girls would file in. Now, in some churches, the girls will sit in the kitchen in front of the women, and in other churches, the girls will sit in the living room behind the men, because the men typically sit there and they have a split right in the center where they face each other. And in the kitchen, the women just all face one way. And then like the girls would go in and they would sit on the back of one side of the men, and then the boys would file in last and they would file in on the other side of the men. And I think actually that some of the churches that I lived in, they didn't always have that split for the men. It just depended on how they set up the benches always. It was weird.
And what kind of space they had, you know, how the house was laid out. Sometimes they just had to set the benches according to the layout of the house too.
They had to make it because everybody was supposed to see the preacher, right? Whoever's preaching, whoever's reading from the New Testament, whoever's like, we were all supposed to see it.
We were supposed to. I rarely remember an occasion where I wasn't able to see the preacher, because we were supposed to be able to see the preacher.
And so then, like, once everybody was seated, you know, we would have singing, and it would always start with the same song. Do you remember how it went, Lynn?
Wait. Did it? No, wait, you guys always started with Lovely?
Do we start with Lovely?
No, I thought it was like somebody picked one of the men that was not a minister would pick a song, and we would start with that one.
Did we start with that?
And then the second song was Lovely.
I thought it was a Lovely.
And then, well, I'm just saying from where I come from. Maybe your church did it different, but
maybe I'm remembering wrong.
Well, what we would do is the men would pick one in the morning, right? Somebody would pick one. Whoever said it first was the one that got to sing. It was no set order who's going to sing the first song. It was just whoever picked a song first and said it would start the song, would be the lead in that song and would sing it. And then the second song was lead. And then if the ministers, for whatever reason, if they still weren't down from the upstairs, sometimes they had saha, things to discuss that took a lot longer. So when the lead was done, they still weren't downstairs. A second person, again, a random person would pick a song, and we would sing that song. And if we sang 2 or 3 verses from that song and they still weren't down, then we would just continue singing until the ministers came down. That's how I remember it.
I think
but it was
might be
always
right,
the second
actually,
song was the.
Yeah, I think we might have sang it the second song too. Like, I just don't remember enough, so I don't want to say one way or the other. I just remember singing Das Loblied at every church service, like every church service.
I even remember what page I went to it this morning.
Oh
I
my
remember
God.
what page, and just for the viewers, this is my original songbook. And I did the decoration. We had a German. We would put our signatures in the book if it was yours. This was given to me by my parents as a Christmas gift.
Oh my God.
By the way. Yeah, these are the sorts of Christmas gifts that we got. It was always some type of Liederbuch or something.
This was a Christmas gift.
What do you have? Oh, yep, I have that one too. Let me dig it out. Yep, I have that one too. New Testament.
Oh my.
It's not a full Bible. This is what we had for our Bible. It's not a full Bible, and it's entirely written in German.
High German.
Written in German. This is what you were allowed to read. I wasn't allowed to read the Bible, by the way.
Yeah. So anyways, do you remember how the Slope Beach started? I'm just saying, because like everybody should know this. If you were ever Amish, you should know this song.
I mean, I'm gonna let you start it because I know you can start it better than I can, but I can easily sing with you.
Okay, but you gotta like announce the page number right.
770.
I'm sorry. God.
You're not supposed to laugh. You cannot laugh.
I'm just saying.
Oh my goodness.
But yeah,
I want to at least do one line without laughing.
Beth.
It's probably gonna take like 5 minutes though.
I don't even. It's so ingrained. Like, I spent 20 years of like every other Sunday, almost 20 years. I was almost 20 years old, and I spent almost 20 years.
I was 28 years old. 28. Yeah, 28 for me.
So ingrained. First off, like, women were not allowed to lead this song in the first place. So,
right.
Like,
correct. Correct.
You know, like, women did not lead any songs in church. But anyways.
Lo
Oh my God.
Wow, I could really get into that one. I could really get into that one.
I think I feel like slightly like, I kept waiting for the church to join in. I needed the church.
And it's not the same if we're like we aren't sitting together, so the vibration wasn't there. Like, it's just not the same to do it on a live with you and me. Like, our voices didn't blend together. But really, that makes me want to like sit down with a group of all of you former Amish people and sing the song.
I think that could be really fun. Hey, I'm going to Philly this week, so maybe we will. Maybe we will. Just
well, there's that, but there's a lot of other things gonna be going on. So I don't know.
I don't know either. But anyways, so so like this, it would take like 20 minutes to like actually sing like this song, like because of like how slow it sang. And it also, when I went to a Catholic church service, like I was reminded of that, like the Amish church singing, just by the way they have their chanting, and you don't understand it. Like it's yeah. So anyways, so once they got started,
I adjusted my.
You adjusted your camera? Yay. So once
they got started, my phone because the lighting was starting to blare and now I have to hold it, so I don't know how that's gonna go. But go ahead. What were you saying?
Oh, I was saying that wasn't it like once they got to like the second verse of the first song or something, the ministry would get up. I'm breaking up. You're not breaking up.
Is it me? Is it Mark? Okay.
Maybe it is.
All right, this works better. It just has a lighting streak there, but that's okay.
It's going to be all right. So what I was asking is,
then once we were done with the Loblied, once the Loblied was sung and the ministers were downstairs, is what you're saying. We only sung two songs for the most part.
Went upstairs. When they went upstairs. When did they go upstairs?
Okay.
When, like, did they go upstairs at like the was it the second verse, or was it like, what was it? Like, it was something. There was always like a predefined like something where they went upstairs. Anybody
remember exactly, but I want to say the second line of the first song.
Is that what it was? Maybe
it was either second line of the first song or the second verse of the first song. But I want to say they went pretty soon.
I want to say it felt like they went pretty soon. And then like sometimes they would have all this church business to discuss, and we would get done with the Loblied, and then like they wouldn't be back down yet. So we just start singing other songs until the ministry came back down. But also every time they get up to go upstairs, like the bishop would go first, and then the ministers, and then the deacon. And when they came back downstairs, it was also the bishop, and then the ministers, and then the deacon. Like there was like a preset, I think, order to the way that they came down and walked around. Like the ministry walked around in a way that showed like their authority structure, I would say.
Yeah.
Because like you were saying, like if someone has 20 years seniority in the position, somebody with like 1 year in the position doesn't have the same authority as somebody with 20 years.
Right.
Yeah. Anyways, one of our listeners also feels like it was the second verse. I feel like it was the second verse, but I could be wrong. I don't know.
Yeah.
Like,
well, yeah. And if you really think about it, as long as it takes to sing those slow verses, like it takes a long time to sing 2 lines of the song. So if they would have waited till the second verse of the song, there's a lot of time that would have gone by.
yes.
Second verse. So I'm thinking they went pretty early because they had a lot of business to discuss usually.
Lots of business, especially when they were.
I mean, it would be interesting to have a former Amish preacher in this live sometime, because I would really like to hear what they discuss in the road every time. You know, I want
to know. Really? Wel, Lynda, du weißt alles mehr Sachen und du musst nicht mehr Sachen erzählen zu der Welt.
Wel, ich gebe euch nämlich nichts drum, weißt.
Oh, ja, ich gebe auch nicht mehr nichts
darf
drum.
alles wissen.
So,
in my opinion.
What I said was, this is church business, and we don't discuss church business with the world. And Lynda said, she just doesn't care anymore. She just wants to know. We do have a question, Lynda. May I ask, did y'all have a pitch pipe? No, we did not. No. It was the only type of instrument that was allowed in Holy Land. One single note at the beginning of every song. No, we were not allowed any instrument in our church services, our wedding services, or in our funeral services. So then
I wasn't even allowed. I wasn't even allowed an instrument in the singing, but I think you had a harmonica, right, Fee?
Yeah, I had a harmonica, okay? Some of the settlements I lived in, they allowed me to have a harmonica. Other settlements did not allow harmonicas. However, even the settlements that allowed harmonicas, they still didn't allow us to like sing and play the harmonica together. They had to be entirely separate.
Right.
And you know, one time I asked them why King David sang and danced before the Lord.
Oh.
I had questions, okay? Like I just had questions.
Right.
But anyways, so then now we're going to talk about, so we would have a preacher get up and preach, and then wouldn't the first preacher do like the short prayer, or was it the deacon that did the short prayer?
It was the first preacher, because the first preacher would preach a brief message, and then he would ask us all to kneel, which was very briefly. We would kneel, the entire church would kneel, and we would have a short prayer.
Right. And preceding that prayer was something like this. And we're going to pretend we're like the fire and brimstone, like the wake up kind of preacher right now. It went something like this.
Did they have a prayer from this?
Did we have what?
I said, did we have the first prayer out of this prayer book? I know the second prayer was out of here, but I don't know about the first one.
I'm pretty sure it was. I think they were both out of the same prayer book, if I remember right. But I could be wrong again. Like, these are like just interesting facets, okay? And then that same minister would get down, and the whole church would kneel together as one in the body of Christ. They would come together and they would kneel together. You could hear it, but it was like a distinctive sound. Like if you didn't do it properly, your sound stuck out. I'm telling you, the sound stuck out. And then the deacon would when we stood up, the deacon would stand up and he would read directly from the New Testament, this book. I have a perfect chapter for everybody. til mig ein bisschen fortælle von Romans chapter 13. 13 Gebete. Jedermann sei untertan die Obrigkeit, die Gewalt über ihn hat, denn es ist keine Obrigkeit ohne von Gott. Wo aber Obrigkeit ist, die ist von Gott verordnet. Wer sich nun wieder die Obrigkeit setzt, die widerstrebt Gottes Ordnung, die aber widerstreben, werde über sich ein Urteil empfangen. Denn die Gewaltigen sind nicht den guten Werken, sondern den Besen zu fürchten. Willst du dich aber nicht fürchten vor die Obrigkeit, so tue Gottes, so wirst du Lob von der Stelle derselben haben, denn sie ist Gottes Dienerin dir zu gut. Tust du aber Böses, so fürchte dich, denn sie trägt das Schwert nicht umsonst. Sie ist Gottes Dienerin, einen Rächerin zur Strafe über den, der Böses tut. Darum ist Not untertan zu sein, nicht allein der Strafe zu willen, sondern auch des Gewillens willen. Okay, we're done.
I found.
I'm sorry, I just have to like translate that for y'all.
Yeah, translate that.
Everybody shall obey the government. Anyways, basically,
the gist of it, and the government is always ordered by God.
Yes.
They say it every Sunday. We have to obey the government. Why are they so disobedient to the government? That just blows my mind.
Also, it goes on to say that, like, you know, and this is another passage of the New Testament that I got in trouble for, okay? Because I was like, wait, what? Because it goes on to say that, like, you know, if you do good, you have nothing to fear from the government. So, anyways, I have questions about that. I always have had questions about that.
And you know what I found?
What?
I found the second prayer they did.
Oh, you did?
Yeah.
The long bit. So then after like the deacon gets done, he might say a few words here and there of like, oh yeah, you know, we all know that when I got up and read this passage, it's such an important thing. We have to obey the government, and the government is appointed by God. And I'm just a Omni Hadina.
You have to tell it in English. What does Omni Hadina mean?
Omni? I don't know how to translate Omni.
I'm just a humble servant from God giving the message is pretty much the way I would translate it.
I wouldn't even say I'm just a humble servant. It's like I'm just a poor, pitiful man.
I think I'm translating it the way I understood the message. I'm not necessarily word for word as they were saying it German, you know, like right. That's my translation of it.
Right. Okay. I mean, and I would translate it as like, you know, I'm just a poor, pitiful man here, you know, and I'm looking for God to give me guidance.
Right.
You know, because there's always that part of it. And so then after like the deacon gets done with his little like spiel, what he's read and talking about it, the whole church sits again, and then the second preaching happens. And you know, sometimes you can literally sit there and sleep through the first preaching, and the second preacher gets up, and they're just like, Liebe Brüder und Schwestern, und alle aber schön spitze Head over Summit and Fisch. Ich habe mir bisschen Stoff sauer gestreut, weil ich denke, was ich sauer kann, hätte ich mehr. Und ich habe spitze gedenkt, was gegeben hat letzte Woche in die Hochzeit. Und zwar so schlimm, was die junge Leute getan haben. Sie sind ausgegangen in die Welt und sie haben Kerne vorne. Und wir wissen nicht, ob es der Hase Wille ist. De äldre misse de kindere ville verbreven sin hostusen. Man du net de kinder liv, stand dich net nede ville verbreven hostu.
Oh my goodness.
En til ik må lade fortælle væk med ægner bu. Himmel det svag er jeg synes, det bare tager jeg. Den himmel det svag har vi en profe. Naskerne, en det kære fire. En jeg har taget af bilnet. En jeg har det spidst ikke grischen op min. I finder snaskeren har min stik op. Nummer fundet buschen har vi en slikkeve. En jeg har slet net, en jeg har net i ukeve. Og nu ben ik nasgangen, I har en großer strap, nu men I har mal bitter slik jebbe. Den nächste dag hem ich mal bisschen schwätzte Wees, for was det mich gehatet. Kinder sollen ihre Eltern immer heihen. Und nu hab ich se Wille verbrochen, na, ist so viel besser. Und wenn du die Kinder lieb hast, dann setzt du mal ihre Wille verbrechen. What?
Oh my goodness. Also preach, don't forget how they preach about the ones that left the church.
Hvis man det net liebe hast für die Kinder, dann gehen sie auch nass in die Welt. Sie nehmen ihre Bund und ihre Fies und sie gehen erst nass in die Welt. Wir wissen nicht, was Hoffnung ist für sie. Wir wissen nicht, was sie du sind. Wir wissen nicht, was das Satan und sie geben hat für du. Und sie gehen erst nass und sie tun erst all das Stoff. Wir wissen nicht, was man du können für sie helfen. Es ist zu spät.
I'm sure you're not going to translate all that. I mean, you can give a brief translation.
Get a bit close to home. I'm sorry. Did I get the intonation right?
I mean, you were not wrong that you wanted to be an Amish preacher. I just could not.
I've learned a lot about what we should say. So the first part was really just like, oh, well, today and last night, I really just, it's such a trouble to me. But really what I thought about is what happened at the wedding last week and how these young folks are going out and driving cars. And we just don't know that that's the Lord's will, and it's the parent's responsibility, and they have to break the will of the child in the high chair. And if they have love for their children, they really need to break their child's will. And to like really summarize that, I'm going to give you an experience with my own child and then share an experience of like, I heard this over and over and over again from parents, like fathers, because the only preachers could be men. They would literally sit there and they would talk about what the young folks are doing. They talk about how, like, that's not okay, how we have concerns about that. And then like they would turn around and they would give an example of like hitting their own children. And how, like, if one thing didn't work to break their will, they would turn around and use another thing to break their will. So, yeah. And then Lynda brought up the whole, like, how they talk about the people who go out into the world. And part of that is like, we just don't know. We just don't know. So the people that go out into the world, they took their covenant and they stepped on it. And we just don't know that there's any hope for them. And once your child goes out into the world, it's too late.
They're given over to Satan, and Satan has them. Everything they do from that day forward, when they make the choice to leave the church, they're in Satan's hand. So anything they're doing is from Satan. And you cannot, it's very hard to even have a conversation beyond that because they're so convinced that you're with Satan.
Mm-hmm. And I think for me, like part of like, you're not wrong. I really did want to be an Amish preacher as a small child.
You told me at 5 years old, you already wanted to be an Amish preacher.
Preacher. I knew where the power was. I knew exactly where the power was. I don't want to be an Amish preacher like that anymore. I don't want nothing to like. I just don't like. That's not even a thing. But I do think there's some of the things that we sometimes like feel is like people think that we are so like, we have certain looks. Like when we go to like church or a wedding or like even a funeral, we have certain looks. We have certain ways we're expected to dress. And then there's also this thing of like our language in and of itself is different. Like we can use the same word or use the same phrase. Like we can say things and it can be like completely due to the intonation, our relationship with the person. Like it can mean two different things, which is just like, so if preacher number one who's sitting there and literally going, I'm just going to read from my little songbook, which, by the way, this is my little songbook that I used when I went with the Jungilet. I'm just going to read from that for a second to remind you of like how we were talking about the first preacher, for example. If he would get up and he would say, "Oh God, Father, wir loben dich und deine Güte preisen, dass du, O Herr, dass du dich, O Herr, gnädiglich und uns nahe hast beweisen und hast uns her zusammengeführt, uns zu ermahnen durch dein Wort, gib uns genau zu diesem." Like if he got up and said those same things in that same tone of voice, it would have a different type of meaning and it would hit differently.
Yeah, like now do it in a way of like a preacher that would really capture the attention of the audience.
It would be like
emotion.
"Oh Gott, Vater, wir loben dich und deine Güte preisen, dass du dich, O Herr, gnädiglich und uns nahe hast beweisen und hast uns her zusammengeführt, uns zu ermahnen durch dein Wort. Gib uns genau zu diesem."
Yeah, a lot more emotion, like a lot more emphasis. You could tell when they were paying attention, when they really meant what they were saying, things like that. It's sort of similar to a motivational speaker versus a speaker that doesn't really have the gifts of being a motivational speaker.
But also, like, culturally, we express ourselves differently.
Yep.
Because the way that some Amish preachers preach, if they went to a secular place and spoke that way in a secular place, the secular people would not understand. And they might even say this person is very angry. But we never saw that as being angry. We saw that as being passionate.
Right. And then we get
as them being caring. We saw that as them considering what they're saying. How they talk matters.
Mm-hmm.
But because they care so deeply, it comes out. We would have preachers who would get up and cry in front of the congregation too.
And shake. Remember the one I was talking to you that shook so much that the entire house was like the floor was shaking? It would vibrate because he was shaking, and he would say that he feels anointed by the Holy Spirit. And I truly to this day believe he was anointed by the Holy Spirit. And he wasn't, if you know, like he was passionate, but he wasn't angry.
Mm-hmm.
He was loving, but he wasn't, like, he was motivated. Whatever he said was with passion and love, and you could feel it. And I think also, Fee, what you were trying to say is often get misunderstood because of the cultural barriers from us and the English world, because we may say something in passion and in love and in caring, and the other person might think we are angry.
Mm-hmm.
I think that's what you were trying to say, right?
Yeah, that's actually exactly what I was saying, because like that is very true. I truly do believe that like in some of the places that I have spoken, if there was an Amish preacher or bishop or deacon or whoever that got up and spoke with that kind of passion, that people would crucify them for being angry, when it has nothing to do with being angry, and it has everything to do with how we were conditioned. There's a time, there's a place, everything. There's a time and a place for everything. So, you know, women are not supposed to speak in the church. Women and AFAB people are not supposed to speak in the church. But me, myself, and I have built a platform with the help of wonderful people like Lynda and the Misfit Amish and the Patreon subscribers and everybody who's listening and following, where I speak. And I speak in the ways that I want to speak. I've been guests on other platforms, and I speak usually in the ways that I feel safe to speak. And I think it's important to recognize that piece of our cultural differences, and to understand that when we ask you questions, we're trying to understand where you're coming from. Usually we're trying to understand where you're coming from. We're trying to understand why you're making statements or asking comments that really come across as being rooted in stereotyping Amish people. And perhaps it's not even due to your own, like, it's not even due to anything. It's just due to the conditioning by society to look at how society looks at Amish people by and large. But when we are sharing with you, I really see it happening to more than just me. I see it happening to a lot of raised Amish people. It's like we communicate differently.
Yeah, and like we even discussed that even when it comes to Mennonites, we often have cultural barriers because Mennonite and Amish are so different. Like I said,
Yeah.
I live in a Mennonite community now, and there is so like I feel very isolated often because I do not understand the Mennonite culture. And when people try and clump us all together as Mennonites and Amish, it doesn't work because we're two very different cultures. We have similarities, but we are very different.
Oh, we are very different. I would agree. We have some overlapping similarities, but also when you start looking at high control groups and how they control people, I mean, they all do it with similar methods. So we have that in common, but also, conscientious objectors. But really, here's the thing. We are not the same. We are not even remotely close to the same. Like, I found it very difficult a lot of times to communicate with many Mennonites. And I do have some wonderful Mennonite friends, okay? But I do think that in the instances that I'm referring to, that part of it is because we are so different, even though we fall under the Anabaptist umbrella, we're not exactly the same.
And I think that's why it's so important. And it seems like we're almost like a breaking record, broken record when we keep saying this repeatedly. I know Fee has said it multiple times, and I say it. I said the same thing. I stand with it that Mennonites should not be speaking for Amish, and Amish should not be speaking for Mennonite because you just can't. It's not the same. It's just not the same.
Uh-huh. And
Their
the
church
other
services are different. The way they wouldn't if an Amish person, a Mennonite person was in this live today, they would tell you completely different story of how they're preaching and how the little details that we had to do to dress it down, everything down to dressing, down to the way we talk, down to the way we greet each other. Everything is different.
Well, and also, like, did Mennonites wear white starch lawn aprons and capes to church every 2 weeks like we did? Because we wore like the white starch lawn aprons and capes to church. But like also, like if a woman was pregnant, she might wear a different, like a colored apron that matched her dress sometimes. Like when she was further along in that family way, like, right? You know what I'm talking about.
Well, we never did because we always had the same dress code. So if the woman was pregnant, there was no difference. Like she wouldn't make her clothing different or anything. Now, I think some of that has changed more recently because I've seen Amish that I would consider not really Amish that I've seen wear we call the bib aprons out in public, and their bib aprons are more like a maternity type clothing. So I think some of them may have changed a little bit, but for the most part in church services, the dress is the same.
Yeah.
But
well,
anyways,
the dress is the same, but that white starched apron might change. Did y'all wear white starch aprons to church?
not the women. The girls did. Did the women?
Yeah, the women did too. In some of the
Once
settlements I lived in.
Once you were married in my community, once you were married, you didn't have to do that. That was one of the greatest things of being married, to be honest. You didn't have to iron the white aprons anymore.
I'm pretty sure now I'm questioning myself though, but I'm pretty sure the women did.
You know, I still have nightmares to this day with those aprons. I recently had a dream where I was at a Amish dry goods store. We called them dry goods store. It was where we would get all our materials and stuff. And I was looking for some of those aprons for my young daughters to wear that wouldn't wrinkle. I didn't want to iron them. That was in my dream.
Oh my God.
Ironing. So much ironing. For what reason? Like it just doesn't
Wash on
make
Monday,
sense.
iron on Tuesday.
Anyway, we haven't finished our church services. I'm patiently waiting to read the last prayer.
Okay. Well, anyways, go ahead. Well, so after the second, like, so the second preacher does all his sermon, and then like it's again like this whole announcement, and the whole church kneels. Aha, here we go. We did not wear the white aprons in the Michigan churches, and the pregnant women would wear big black jackets.
Oh, wow. Wow.
I'm telling you, maybe it's just the differences in this element.
Did you know that years ago, like my great grandmother, in her time period, women did not go in public when they were pregnant.
Mm-hmm.
They would not go in public. You wouldn't see them at the church services. You wouldn't see them out and about.
And like furthermore, like at like the end of their pregnancy, like the last 6 weeks of their pregnancy, like some women wouldn't go to church. Yeah.
I remember that because it was like I forgot about that part, but every time I was pregnant, I wouldn't go to church the last at least 2 weeks, sometimes a little bit more when you weren't quite sure when your due date was. You wouldn't go to church at least 1 or 2 times before the baby was born.
And then after the baby was born, they wouldn't go for 6 weeks. Ooh, Lynda's froze. Are you still there? Yeah. Yeah. So after like the baby was born, did you like also stay home for 6 weeks with your baby?
I'm frozen. I'm frozen.
No, you're fine now, I think. Yeah, women would stay home at the last month or so. It
Yes.
probably also had to do with the sheer misery of having to sit on those backless benches with a pregnant Billy. Yeah, like those wooden benches. I can't imagine having been pregnant and sitting on those backless benches. Like I'm just saying the wooden benches like that. Ugh. I can't imagine. And then like another thing is like once the baby was born, then the woman would usually have like a
They
mop.
often gave you a chair. Like I was
You're cutting out. They often gave is the last thing we heard.
Yeah, I'm realizing that, and I don't know why, because I have very good service.
I don't know either, but they often gave what?
Oh, they gave us chairs to sit on.
Oh.
They gave us chairs.
I just can't imagine. Anyways, but after the baby was born, did you also stay home for 6 weeks and did you have a mott?
I didn't. Yeah. I wouldn't work it. I wasn't allowed to do anything for 6 weeks.
Yeah. Okay. So, anyways, so there's that whole thing, and now we're going to go back to this whole like second preacher thing. The second preacher, then we have the long prayer, and with this prayer, like sometimes I fell asleep with this prayer, but Lynda's gonna like take one for the team and like read part of it to us at least. Let's hear it.
Well, this is how it started, and I'm not going to do the whole thing, of course. Oh, Herr Gott vom Herz hier, lieber himmlischer Vater, wir danken dir, dass du uns nicht allein zu diesem zeitlichen Leben erschaffen, sondern auch nach deiner unvermeidlichen Gnade schon von Gewissenheit her zu den himmlischen und ewigen Leben erwählen und uns dasselbe durch deinen Liebenssohn Jesu Christen erworben und bereitet hast. Sound about right?
you I can't with
I have another verse that I want to do. I'm just gonna go through some of them. Here's one that I really like. Stark i uns und trägt die auch alle Kranken betrieben Herzen. Sei ihnen gnädig und gib ihnen zu erkennen, dass du sie aus Liebe tätigen.
You Are you sure? Yeah. I think you wanted to be a deacon. That's what you wanted.
Oh my goodness.
Oh my goodness. And as a reminder, women were not allowed to participate in any of this. This was all done by men, all led by men. What we were allowed to do is we were allowed to get on our knees and pray. And you know what else? Not only were we allowed to get on our knees and pray, we were allowed to sing to help us get that right message from the preaching. So then, yep. Usually after that, what would happen after that, Lynda? After that long prayer?
Well, we would get up and then they would continue, the minister would continue with a couple more verses and everybody bends their knees in unity and we sit down and we sing the last song together. And then after the last song, and here's a key thing that I feel is important to note that Mennonites don't do, at least not the Mennonites that I know, that we would always, after the last song, all the women would prepare a meal and everybody would fellowship afterwards together. It was very uncommon and very like looked down. You were looked down upon if you left the church services before eating. Even the young folks, but I know a lot of young folks did that. However, it wasn't really a good idea to leave the church services before you fellowship and before you had the meal. And that lasted well into 1, 2 o'clock in the afternoon.
And also, the announcement. We always had an announcement somewhere that was like, when we're done singing,
where the next church services would be.
Yeah, when the next church services, where the next, like, in 2 weeks, we will gather at Lynda's house for church, Lord willing. And also, after the last song is sung, we need everybody who's not baptized to give the church space. Yeah.
Yeah, but also the ministers did tightness, or what was it called?
Tightness. Yeah, they did.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Where they each gave their opinions about the message that was spoken. And it wasn't uncommon if somebody disapproved sometimes of the message that was spoken.
Anyways, yes, we did hear some of that. But also, so then they would sing the last song, and then everybody that wasn't baptized would have to leave. And then if it was a specific person who was in trouble like me, they would name me as having to give the church space with that last announcement, right? And so then, like, everybody would get out. And this is like, okay, the woman of the house and her, like, daughters and everybody, like, they had come together, and people would, like, help her, like, clean the house the week prior. And not only that, she would be during this whole, like, 3 hours long process of at least 3 hours church service, probably like 3.5, maybe even 4, just for a regular church service. Sometimes after, like, church business gets handled, right? Because that can take a while sometimes when they disagree, Anyways, she would be, like, working on preparing the food and making sure that everything's ready to have that fellowship meal as soon as like the church business is handled and everything is taken care of. So, like, once, like, the people left, like children left and unbaptized people left, and the person who was in trouble, then they would, like, announce, like, the issues, and then they go around and try to get them.
If they had what you're referring to as sits, if they had what
you're cutting out, if they had Stillhocker. Hello?
I wasn't saying anything.
Oh, if they had Stillhocker, then what?
Sits me. When it was sits me, everybody had to come in then. Even if they were preparing the food, if they were members of the church, all members had to come in. Yeah. If you did not attend sits me, then you might get in trouble. Like, you had to attend, and you had to give your vote in agreement. If you did not do that, you might get kicked out of the church.
Yeah. So that's where, like, the woman of the house had spent, like, hours before, like, preparing for this, because we had soup that we would cook and serve, like bubbly soup and all of that, like, like, we had soup that we would serve. So, like, they had spent all this time, like, preparing, but they still had to come in for that. And, like, they would have, like, the older girls would be responsible for maintaining the food while we're sitting, like, to make sure it's prepared and ready. Like, so, like, if we're making soup, the milk's not boiling over, there's still a fire there in the kettle, because we would cook our soup. I don't know how y'all did it, but we would cook our soup in a 30-gallon kettle in the basement under a wood fire.
See, we didn't have soup.
Yeah. So it was like a whole process. And, like, that was, like, we lived in other settlements where they didn't have soup, but primarily the settlements I lived in, they had soup. But that was pretty much the whole process. Like, that had to be maintained because we had soup. So it had to be ready. Like, so our water kettle that we had in the basement, like, would usually have to be maintained throughout like the entire time that the church is sitting still, even though the woman of the house who is baptized has to come in because they have to get a tagness, they call it, which is like they take a road. They're getting an even, or not even. It's not even. What do you call it? Tim is an enigal road hava. Because they would put the issue to the church, and then they would say, "Oh, we have to have a enigal road."
Right. The word of agreement.
Mm-hmm. Well, they have to have people voting in agreement with.
They had to give their word.
Yeah. But then that's where, like,
isn't optional, even if they try and tell you that it was optional.
No, it wasn't. It was never optional. You always had to vote. Like me, I was told that, I had to vote with my stepfather. And that when I got married, like, I was taught that when I get married, I have to vote with my potential husband, whoever that might be. And so for me, it didn't even feel like it was a choice. Like, not only was it not a choice to participate or not participate, it was also not a choice in how I voted, because people could disagree. However, if they disagreed, what would happen to them? Does anybody know?
They would get shunned. They would get kicked out of the church.
So, like, is it really an option to disagree when it goes to that extreme? When disagreement means that you can potentially lose your church membership. And I think for me, like, just understanding the Amish church preaching and how it goes, like, yeah. That whole fellowship meeting afterwards, and then like the whole like Sunday evening supper where people would be invited back for supper. Remember that? And the singing. No? Yeah. It was like a whole day. Church Sunday was a big deal, usually, I would say. But we have
very
a couple
good service here.
Yeah, we have a couple of things. One person asked, "Can we talk about me or gross me, because those were rough, especially as kids?" I don't quite have time to get into that, but you're welcome to be a guest and come talk about Otnings or gross me. I'd be happy to in 2 weeks. If everything goes as planned, in 2 weeks, we can reconvene to discuss.
McKenna vill ha med har vi en tvåhövande McKenna vill ha med har vi en tvåhövande
Ja, McKenna med har vi en tvåhövande hassebillis.
McKenna use all the rules for Braham. McKenna tama kuma emos the minute and coffee drink and me have a novella.
But I think like it's interesting to have this conversation, because it's also like culturally, where do we get our ideas from? How do we understand ourselves if we're embodied in this idea of like all anger is bad? But when we are culturally conditioned that there's a time and place for everything, and that, when we speak freely, this is how we speak.
Right.
But then we get crucified for that from other cultures because they simply don't understand us.
Right. Yep. Yep. It's just so much. And like, even to get this whole box of German books this morning, I'm just like, whew.
Well, so
there's so much of us that is always a part of us, no matter what.
We can sing a soggy Gute Nacht, because that's like, I don't know about y'all, but for us, like on Sunday nights when we had the singings, that was always the last song at our singings was "I soggy Gute Nacht." Did y'all ever sing that?
I think, but I'm not sure. I'm not sure if I know what you're going for. We didn't sing it every Sunday.
Oh,
so
we
might have
sure
to sing a verse or so, a line or so before, to see if I can catch on.
I soggy Gute Nacht, Bethlehem, Bethlehem. Der irdischen Pracht Bethlehem, verlasse die Welt und schwinget die Seele ins himmlische Zelt Bethlehem.
No, I'm not familiar with that.
Or there's different versions of it. We sang all different versions of it. I soggy Gute Nacht, der irdischen Pracht, verlasse die Welt und schwinget die Seele ins himmlische Zelt. Are you finding it? You're really finding it in your book too?
No, I'm just looking at some songs that we sung, and I was going to see if I can sing one verse of them before we close. I was going to have that as my closing message.
Okay. Well, let's hear it.
But no, I'm not familiar with I'm not familiar with the one that you were singing.
Oh, that's okay. But you feel free to sing your song.
You have to give me a minute because I don't have a song. I was just looking through the book, and I'm just like, dang, it's been so long I've been here that I don't even know if I remember which of the songs we sung.
Can I give you a page number for your little songbook?
Yeah, for the brown one.
This one.
Lira you mean the Dicky Lira?
Dinny Lira book. Nope, not that one.
We have the same one. This is what we sung from.
Oh my God!
We sung. Yeah, I think we sung the different songs because I don't. When you say Dinny Lira Biha, I think we actually have different versions of books because you're singing completely different songs.
Yeah. Yeah, there's so many songs. But anyways, like that's not even the point. The point is like we have different tools that are used and different ways of, I don't know, expressing ourselves. And also some of it was pretty obvious. What's up, Lynda? You got something?
I have one. Do you remember do you remember Demütig die Schönste?
Yes. It's page 199, isn't it? It's the same page in this book.
I have that one I can sing. See that mine is 149. 149. 149. 149. So you have a different book, but yeah, we have the same song.
Yeah, we have the same song. Demudish. Are you going to go ahead, Lynda? Let's hear you sing Demudish de Schenchte Tugend.
Breaking up.
You're breaking up.
Okay. Demudish de Schenchte Tugend. Aller Gricht and reminisce. Play and see. No to loven. Die zu großen Glücker haben. Sich mehr aus golden Gold. Und was herrlich in der Welt.
Oh my God. You don't even sing it the same.
I know. Like you same songs that you were singing. A couple pages over, there's another one that used to be one of my favorite, which is called Meinem Jesen will ich lieben.
We knew no. Yeah.
Meinem Jesen will ich lieben, thou ich noch in Leben bin, Energie, Mut und Sinn, bleibt mir ins Herz geschrieben. I don't think that's the right tune. But yeah, there's a lot of songs. I have to go through them, and
yeah,
some of them I forgot to tune. But we would often use the tunes that I've noticed. We would often use the same as in English hymns. We would use those tunes in German hymns when we sung them in German.
Interesting.
Like Bedenke Mensch das Ende, the tune of 20 Froggies. Well, that's not even a hymn, but a song that we used to sing in school was 20 Froggies. And that tune goes to Diminish the Shanshatugan, and that's like it's such a sick brain twister. I can't.
I'm sorry. Well, in a cavern by a canyon. You know that song called
Nope.
Clementine?
Oh my goodness, that used to be one of my favorites.
And then, like, listen to
yes!
this. Okay, we're like just keeping going, but I really gotta go because I got stuff to take care of. But I am gonna say this. There were songs that we sang that to. Clementine. We would sing the tune of Clementine to our German songs. Anyways, there were also songs that our ministry would preach against and that our parents would tell us.
Clementine song, because that used to be my favorite.
Yeah. But it's that time. Do you have any parting messages for anybody, B? Yeah. Do you have anything else you would like to share, Lynda? Go ahead. Yes, no, maybe.
Goes with the German prayer for the Lord's Prayer. I think that's what they call it, right?
Yep.
We were supposed to use that prayer every single day. And one time when I nearly got kidnapped, my mom said, and we came home, we're going to pray the Lord's Prayer, so I'm going to be fine today. Unser Vater in den Himmel, dein Name wird geheiligt, dein Reich komme, dein Wille geschehe auf Erden wie im Himmel. Gib uns des Tag unser täglich Brot und vergib uns unser Debt, wie wir unser Debt forgiven. And I am so sorry, I do not know the rest of the prayer.
Oh,
but
that's okay.
I'm still going to be protected today.
Okay.
I'm still going to be protected.
Good for you. Well, thank you, everybody, for joining us. Thank you, Lynda. Thank you, everybody, for all of your comments, for listening, for hearing. Thank you to our Patreon subscribers who have funded this along with the Misfit Amish. Thank you for this production. Thank you, BJK, for the art. As always, like, comment, subscribe, share. We couldn't do this without you. Like, it really wouldn't exist if it wouldn't be for everybody who either is a guest, a listener, or podcast subscriber, or even our advisory board at the Misfit Amish. So thank you. Y'all have a great and wonderful, fabulous day. Live your best lives.